Hello guys, and welcome back to Joe's Ventures. And today we're going to be doing part 151 of our Planet Zoo mod spotlights. We'll be taking a look at some of the wonderful mods people have been making and use them to talk about some of the wonderful biodiversity that we share our world with. So today we've got a very interesting assortment of animals I'm actually quite excited to talk about. We got a couple marsupials, we've got an extinct animal, we've got some birds, we've even got ourselves a slug, which I'm really quite sea slug, which I'm quite excited to talk about. And we'll be starting off with that animal. So by Costco DS, who's a relatively new mod on the scene, but is doing quite well. We have got the blue dragon slug, which is a very interesting little guy. So let's have a look at these guys. Let's see if we can find one swimming in the light so we can get a good look. There we are, look at you. Aren't you so pretty? So this is Glassicus atlanticus, or also known as the blue sea dragon, the blue angel, the dragon slug, or the blue ocean slug. They've got a few different names. These guys are a species of sea slug. They are closely related to a couple other species of sea slugs, but they get the name blue dragon. They share them with a couple other species, but really, really interesting. So in terms of their description, as you can see here, at maturity they reach about 3 centimeters or just over an inch long, and though larger specimens have been found, and they can live for up to a year in the right conditions. You can see they're silvery grey on their dorsal side, so on their side, and dark and pale ventrally. They have dark blue stripes on their head and a flat tapering body with 6 appendages that kind of branch out, as you can see like there, and the into ray-fingered like cirra. So cirra, also known as papillae, these guys kind of come up from these peduncle, so you can see like there, looks almost like lots of little fingers, or like a ray, which is quite cool. And they can have up to 80, these are formed in a single row, and can actually be up to 84 inches total, so there's quite a big surface area. And this species is Atlanticus, which is the blue sea dragon. These guys are typically found in tropical and subtropical waters, floating on the ocean surface due to stored gulped air inside their stomach. And they usually feed on tdarans, which are like jellyfish, which can be noisy during the air escape as it feeds. And like slugs, they have a radula and they have serrated teeth, and paired with the strong jaws and dentary that allow them to really bite down on their prey. So these guys are very carnivorous. These guys are very interesting. So these guys float on the surface, as I mentioned, with the gas fill in their stomach, and the upper surface is actually the foot, so the underside of the other slugs is there. So they're actually kind of always upside down. And the true dorsal surface carried is completely silvery grey, and this is an example of counter shading that helps protect it from predators. So if you're under it, you kind of see it. You can't really see the outline compared to the light at the top of the ocean, and in reverse. So when you look down on it, you camouflage to the dark depths of the ocean, so you can't really see it. A really common thing in nature. It also has been thought to reflect ultraviolet light that can be quite harmful to these guys. That's quite interesting. So in terms of these guys, they are pelagic, so they can be found throughout the world's oceans, typically in temperate to tropical waters. They've been recorded from South Africa, European waters, Australia, and Mozambique. And others suggested that these guys actually have increased their range, even in the Gulf of California, which is quite interesting. And there have been reports of them in the Azores, and recently found in the Humboldt Current, so they're pretty much like global. And because these sea slugs are so global and live in the open ocean, they can sometimes be found on shores or beaches. Even there's been some found in the Gulf of Mexico, and even one last year in April 31st, or August 31st, blue sea slugs were found in Thailand. So they have quite a wide range, quite a vagrant specimen. So what's really interesting about these sea slugs as well, let's see if we can find one that's swimming around. Because that's part of the fun. There we are, look at one swimming around. A little bit more movement from these guys. So really interesting about these guys is that they actually feed on other larger pelagic organisms. So they have a very interesting diet. They can move towards prey or mates using their fingers or their papillae to swim around. And they've been known to prey on animals that are considered quite dangerously venomous. So things like Portuguese man-o'-wars, the by-the-wind sailors, or blue buttons, and the violet snail. So these are all species that are considered very toxic to people and most other animals, but these guys can have them no worries, and occasionally they have been known to eat each other in captivity. So the species are able to feed on Portuguese man-o-war because of their immunity to the venomous nematocytes that live on it. And they can typically will consume chunks of the organism and actually can select and store their most venomous ones to use against future prey. So they actually take the venom from the man-o-war, and then when they hunt other prey, they can use the venom from the man-o-war to attack their prey and kill it, which is quite interesting. And they are collected in special sacs called China sacs and the animal's cetra, so the tips of their papillae. And because it concentrates the venom, they can actually have a more powerful and deadly sting than the man-o-war of which it feeds, so it can be quite powerful. So you've got to be very careful if you ever handle these guys. So like almost all heterobronchs, these guys are hermaphrodites, so they both have male and female reproductive organs, and their male reproductive organs have actually evolved to be pretty large and hooked to avoid their venomous cetra of their partner. But unlike most reproducts, they mate with their right sides facing, and their sea slugs will mate with their ventral sides facing, so they kind of fate to the side. After mating, though, individuals will lay eggs and can release up to 20 on an egg string, and often lays them on wood pieces or in carcasses. And on average, they can lay up to 55 egg strings in a sitting. That times that by 20 eggs, that's quite a bit. And they're not globally polyminic, but they're localized within ocean basins. So even though they are found worldwide, they typically don't stray too much out of basins, so there might be a little bit of variation. So gene flow across the Afro-Eurasian and American populations is hindered due to physical obstructions and water temperatures from the Atlantic, the Arctic and Southern Oceans. So they are kind of isolated, but they're still considered different species. Same species, I mean. So as I mentioned as well, they can swallow the nematocysts from the venomous animals like Portuguese man-o-war and store them in their centres. And this can be quite a painful sting, and it can be quite similar to the stings that you'd get from a Portuguese man-o-war. So the symptoms you can get is nausea, pain, vomiting, acute allergic contact dermatitis, erythema, vesicle and like post-inflammatory hyperpigmentation. So lots of big issues there. You definitely don't want to be stung by one of these guys, but luckily you probably won't encounter them too often since they live out in the open ocean. You're not going to cross them too often. But yeah, this is a really great mod. I love Tosco DS. He's really done a great job with this one. So nice to see some really interesting animals that don't get much love, and even I learned a little bit researching this guy, so I really love learning about new things. But yeah, really, really awesome little mod there. So, next up, we've got Ginger Toast, who's returned with another bird mod. Let's have a look at these wonderful guys. So this is the Indian spotted spot-billed duck, or Anas progeronchia. These guys are a species of large dabbling duck that are non-migratory, that live across the Indian subcontinent. And they get the name from the red spot at the base of their bill that's found on the normal Indian population. So these guys were first described by Johann Reinhard Foster in 1781 under their current binomial name, and its name specific means pied bill, so it basically means spot bill. So these guys have been lots of research into their genetics, and they seem to be a clade containing the Mexican duck, the American black duck, the mottled duck, and the mallard, which is quite as well. And they seem, though later research has suggested they're closer to Hawaiian or Laysan ducks, so it's kind of really don't know where they fit there. But there is 2 different subspecies believed, or 2 or 3. So the eastern spot-billed duck was actually formerly considered a 3rd subspecies of these guys, but they were actually considered now their own species. And the 2 remaining is the Indian spotted duck, which is the type species, and then the Burmese spotted spot-billed duck is the Hamiltoni, which is the other subspecies, which is quite interesting. Though most taxonomists now consider the Chinese one its own species, which is quite cool. They're about the same size as a mallard duck, if you guys, I assume you're quite familiar with mallards because they're found pretty much everywhere. They have a scaly patterned body with a green speculum of white as well. And it seems their long neck with a bill with a yellow tip and orange-red spots at the base that are distinctive to the dominant subspecies. And in flight, you can see the green speckledom on the thing as well, at the base of the bills, but it is absent in Harringtoni. They typically will measure between 55 and 63 centimeters, or about 20 to 25 inches in length, and about 83 to 95, or about 33 to 37 inches across the wings, with a body mass between 790 to 1,500 grams, or between 1.7 to 3.3 pounds. But you can also see they're mainly grey ducks with a paler head, and they have a black billed tip that's quite bright yellow. The wings are whitish with black feather down as well, and they almost have like this kind of ellipse plumage, which is do not have ellipse plumage, which is quite interesting. And juveniles are typically just duller and redder than the adults, as you can kind of see here. And their actually body plumage is quite similar to the Pacific black duck, but lacks the red spots, so it's an easier way to tell them apart. So look at these little babies right here. Look at this little guy. It's really cool. So both males and females will undergo a post-breeding molt and drops all their wing feathers simultaneously. So in terms of their distribution, they are resident through Pakistan and India and freshwaters, and then they tend to avoid very large patches of open water and prefer medium-sized wetlands with some covers. However, they've been known to migrate and are quite gregarious outside the breeding season and form more flocks. And the northernmost population has expanded its range more than 500 kilometers, potentially because of global warming. So some species are actually benefiting from global warming, believe it or not. Yeah, really, really cool. So in terms of their biology, these are birds found in freshwater lakes and marshes in fairly open country, and they feed by dabbling for plant matter as they find it. The breeding season varies for water conditions, but in northern India it's July to December, and in southern India November to December, with multiple broods being raised. They nest and ground hidden by vegetation near water and lay between 8 to 14 eggs. And the nests are sometimes made by tree branches covered by creepers. Incubation begins when the last egg is laid, and their young will hatch after about 24 days. You can see the cute little guys. And you can see they almost look like a mallard. We already kind of had a look at them before. But these guys have a black with a yellow band that resemble those of mallards, but they do have a wider eye stripe. That's how you kind of tell them apart. And they're quite similar to mallards in a lot of ways. They do have similar calls to mallards. And mallards and eastern spotted blue ducks have been known to hybridize, which is a little bit of an issue, but that's kind of not really. It's other species that are more endangered, it's more of a worry, but the hybridization is something that's going to happen in nature, you can't prevent it. These guys, though, will typically feed on plants. They'll include crops like rice and things like that, but they'll feed invertebrates like snails. They'll eat as well, so lots of little snails and things. And there seems to be isolated from other species, so they're typically found by themselves and usually in pairs or small groups. And when disturbed, they take off quite easily and nearly vertically from the water. They were hunted exclusively in British India for their excellent taste, but when shot at, especially when molt, they've been known to dive and remain underwater to evade capture. And actually, the local name is Jerak Pai in India. Southern India is in, which is quite interesting. And in southern India, there's a method of hunting using floating bundles of rushes where the hunters will lay in wait. But natural predators includes bird of prey and things like pythons and otters and things like that. So they're not free of predators, which is a little bit sad, but still cool. Love these guys. Love the Indian spot-billed duck. And a really nice, cool duck that we get to have in the game. I love this like a little bird revolution we've got going on. So next up, we have got the Laughing Kookaburra. This was done by Ricky Ice, his second mod. So let's have a wonderful look at these guys. Really, really cool. So the Laughing Kookaburra, these guys are a type of kingfisher in the family Haclunidae, and are quite large. They are considered the largest of the kingfishers. So their name comes from the Laughing Kookaburra, and the name first recorded was the Laughing Jackass, which is quite funny. Another popular name was actually several Aboriginal names, which comes from Kookaburra, which is how it's been interpreted. They are in the genus Dralico, which is along with other species of Kookaburra, such as the rufous-bellied Kookaburra and the spangled Kookaburra, which are native to New Guinea, which is quite interesting. And actually, whatever. But there's actually two subspecies recognized. There's the nominate subspecies found in East Australia and Tasmania, introduced into southwestern Australia. And then minor, which is found in Cape York, south of Cooktown. So these guys are the largest species of kingfisher. They outsize even the giant kingfisher and mash, so they are the largest of them all. They have a short, stocky body that's between 41 to 47 centimeters, or about 16 to 19 inches in length, with a large head, prominent brown eyes, and long and robust bill. The sexes are very similar, although the females are usually larger and have less blue on their rump than the male. So typically males will also weigh between 196 to 450 grams, or 6.9 to 15 ounces, with on average being about 10 ounces or about 307 grams. Females a little bit bigger, bigger or a little bit smaller on average, about 190 to 465, or 6.7 to 16.4 ounces, with a mean of 352. So on average a little bit bigger. They have a white, you can see cream-coloured body and head with a dark brown stripe across their eye, and you can see they've got like a rusty tail going on, with dark brown bands as well, and white tips to their feathers, which is quite cool. And quite a heavy bill, as you can see going on there. And they can be distinguished by smaller size, like blue-winged kookaburras, by their dark eyes, shorter bills, and duller rumps as well. In terms of their call, there's like one of the things that makes them so characteristic is their call, because they laugh. They use this call to establish territories, and they can be heard any time of the day, but more frequently at dawn and dusk, to establish their territories. They have a tracheobronchial syrinx, which a lot of birds have. This allows them to kind of create two sources of vibration, so they can have these really complex calls. A lot of birds have this. Is how a lot of birds can make their songs. And that's how they believe to have kind of got their name as well, a little bit of onomatopoeia, because they go, you've obviously heard the call, I'm not going to try and replicate it. But these calls are produced to attract and guard mates, establish territory, and maintain social hierarchies as well. And this is a way that they communicate with each other. And the acoustic communication can increase 2 to 3 months during the breeding season, which is about September to January, for male aggression also increases. And they do duet as well. But these guys also will make squawks and other calls to kind of, establish their dominance, which is quite interesting. So in terms of their habitat, these guys are native to Eastern Australia and a range that extends from Cape York in the north to Cape Otway in the south. And they can be present both eastern and western sides of the Great Dividing Range. And the south, their range extends westward from Victoria to the York Peninsula and Fenler's Range in South Australia. They've been introduced to other areas because of their reputation for killing snakes. They've been introduced in other places, the eastern sides of the US states as early as 1883. Acclimation societies introduced them as like kind of pest control for snakes, which I'm not sure really works. But in 1912, breeding populations have been established in Western Australia, also Tasmania. They're believed to be introduced. And they've been introduced to New Zealand as well. In the 1860s, there was a Governor, George Grey, that brought a bunch of Australian animals, all sorts of different animals. He wanted to create a little zoo. He had a little island called Kowal that he brought all sorts of animals. And kookaburras actually live there now and have been doing well. They were introduced to being accessible, but there were some birds that were discovered on the adjacent mainland, and now they can be found in a western side of the Rocky Gulf between Lae and Kumeu, which is quite interesting. And there actually was one individual found in Suffolk, in the UK, which is really interesting, so that would have been introduced. But their typical habitat is open forest and woodland, but they're more common in the understory, and they like tree holes for nesting, and their range does overlap with other species of kookaburra, but they tend to they like to favour areas near water, while the blue-winged kookaburras prefer drier habitats. So as I mentioned, they have territories. And during breeding, these guys actually breed a lot to a wattle during mating season. They'll actually indulge behaviours similar to wattle birds. They adopt a bigging posture and vocalise like a young bird, and they kind of use that to kind of female approaches and offers it to him. Nest building typically starts from August, with peak egg laying September, November. And if first clutch fails, they will continue breeding into the summer months. So they will sometimes have another baby. So let's see if we can find a little juvenile. Oh, first try. Look at this little cutie. Anyway, during the I already mentioned that. The females will lay eggs in a clutch of about 3 semi-glossy white rounded eggs that measure between 36 to 45 millimeters, or about 1.4 to 1.8 inches, after 2-day intervals. And both parents will incubate the eggs for about 24 to 26 days. And the young hatchlings are typically attritial, so they can't do much once they're born. They still have to do a lot of growing, so the parents will have to come and feed them. And if the third if the food supply is not adequate, the third egg will be smaller and be at a disadvantage. So they will also have a hook on their undermandible that actually disappears by the time of fledging, and they'll quarrel and hook each other and fight each other. And the smallest chick may actually be killed by its larger siblings, though if food is plentiful, the parents will spend more time brooding their chicks, so the chicks don't need to fight. So as well as being interesting in that regard, these guys are kingfishers. So they are, let's see, sleeping there. Well, have a look at you sleeping. How cute. Anyway, they hunt as other kingfishers. They do all the kind of perch and then wait for passerby. But these guys can eat a little bit larger prey. They can eat mice and smaller sized mammals, lots of invertebrates, yabbies, small fish, lizards, frogs, small birds, nestlings, and more famously snakes. They've been known to take on snakes, especially venomous snakes, as why they were introduced to some areas to help control snakes. And these guys also have a bunch of visual displays to actually kind of like establish their territories. So like trapeze and circular fights. So these guys will like perch on a branch, boarding another territory, and fly back and forth to establish home range. And then circle flights initiated when a neighboring territory, they kind of fly and invade their neighboring territory. And these displays are kind of ways to establish their territories and fight each other, which is quite interesting. In close range, visual signs used to convey aggression include threaten, so they could posture quite aggressively. They'll spread their wings to propel their heads forward with their tail feathers to establish dominance, and use a few other ways, of course, to kind of establish their territories and all that, which is quite cool. In terms of their relationship to humans, in Australia, they're considered quite a common sight in, of course, Australia. They can be found in urban areas and are so tame sometimes they eat out of people's hands. It's actually not common for kookaburras to snatch food out of people's hands without warning, and they're often kept in zoos, and people often feed them pieces of raw meat too. So they're quite a common part of Australian culture. And in terms of conservation status, the population density varies a bit between 0.04 to 0.8 birds per hectare, depending on the habitat, though this is believed to be potentially a gross overestimate. And they are considered least concern as they have a large range and quite a stable population. And the New Zealand population is relatively small. There's probably no more than 500 individuals. But in their native range, they're doing quite well. They do live well with people, and it's still quite common. So that's why they're considered not too endangered. But yeah, really, really cool. So next up, we're going to be moving on from birds. Now we've got a remake. So this is an animal that's been remade a couple times. I've already covered it a couple times, but this one was made by Great Cakes Mod this time. The original was done by Nicholas Line Rider and all them, but now Great Cakes Mod has kind of stepped into the ring to remake it, and it does look absolutely beautiful. So this is the Aoudad, or the Barbary sheep. These guys are species of caprine, or species of goat or sheep, native to the Rocky Mountains of North Africa. And with the only species of genus, there is six subspecies described, but I'm not sure how true they are. And they have, even though they're native to North America, they've been introduced into North America. Native to North Africa, they've been introduced to North America and Southern Europe, which is quite interesting. So in terms of their description, these guys typically stand about 75 to 110 centimeters, or 2'6" to 3'7" at the shoulder, and are length at about 1.5 meters, or 5 feet, and weigh about 300 to 245 kilograms, or 66 to 320 pounds. You can see they are sandy brown, darkening with age, with slightly light underbelly and a darker line across the back. Upper parts as well tend to be like a uniform reddish as well. And some typically, as you can see, have quite shaggy hair down their throat that extends down right to the chest in the males, like you see here. We'll look at a female to compare to the males, so you can see have quite a extensive mane. These horns are also triangular cross-section, and they can curve outwards, backwards, then inwards, so it kind of comes in a loop. And they extend up to 76 centimeters or 30 inches in length. And these horns are fairly smooth, with slight wrinkles evidence as animals mature. See, that's pretty much what a big male looks like. We can look at the female over there. That's not what we wanted to do. Where is she? There she is. So you can see the females, they do have a little bit more shed, but it's nowhere near as big and extensive as the male there. But you can see it comes in the legs as well. But yeah, really, really cool. So in terms of their natural range, they are endemic to Northern Africa, and they can be found in Egypt, Algeria, Chad, Liberia, Mali, Morocco, Tunisia, and Western Sahara. And their native range have decreased due to hunting, legal or otherwise, and destruction of habitat, so they're not doing too well. They are considered vulnerable in their native habitat, but they have been introduced to other places. They've been introduced to Spain in the 1970s. They were to colonize them because people wanted to obviously hunt them. But now they're considered a positive competitor for native ungulates inhabiting that peninsula, that they have been introduced into the Canary Islands and throughout parts of islands where they're a serious threat to the island vegetation that's not used to grazing by goats. And as I mentioned, they've been introduced to the US for hunting. And there have been reports, although the species is not recorded in Australia, they're considered a pest species in Queensland, and with the potential to establish. If someone released some Aoudads, they'd probably do okay, so that's why we don't want it. So there is a few different subspecies, but I'm not sure how valid they are. I'm not going to go through, but they're all considered vulnerable. But in terms of the habitats, these guys really do like arid, mountainous areas where they can graze on browsers, grasses, and lichens. And they're actually able to grab all their metabolic water from food, but if liquid water is available, they will, of course, drink and wallow in it. So as well, to avoid the heat of the day, these guys are crepuscular, so they're active in early morning and late afternoon and rest during the heat of the day. And they are very agile. They can actually achieve a standing jump of over 2 meters or 7 feet. And they are well adapted to their habitat of steep rocky mountains and canyons, often flee at the sight of danger, and are extremely nomadic and travel constantly via these mountain ranges. And their predators in North Africa were Barbary leopards, Barbary lions and caracals, but now humans, feral dogs, and competition for overgrazing by domestic animals threatens their population, which is a little bit sad. But yeah, still really, really cool. And we'll have a look at the cute little baby, Nice remaster. I love a good remaster. And as always, Great Cakes mod always knocks it out of the park. So really, really awesome. So you can have a look at the male again. How beautiful is he? Really, really cool. So anyway, we're going to be moving on. We're going to prehistory for a little bit. So let's have a look at these wonderful guys. So let's see. Is this the male? Yeah, that's the male. So we're going to have a look at this really interesting prehistoric animal. This is Kookaburra major. So these guys are they look like a saber-toothed cat, but they're not a true saber-toothed cat. So they are Nimravus. So they are cat-like, but not a true cat. Their other name, common name, is false saber-toothed cats. And they are from the early Oligocene of France. The fossils were found in early Oligocene strata in Quoll, which they get their name. And these guys are quite famous for being potentially the largest Nimravus to ever known. And they could potentially get as big as a modern-day lion, which is quite interesting. And currently there's only one described species, which is major. And these guys would have lived in the moist, humid forests of Oligocene Europe, along its much smaller fellow Nimravus, things like Eophilus. So, Kookaburra, as I mentioned, is often considered the largest definite Nimravus, with remains indicating these guys could have got to the size of modern lions, with mass estimates of about 140 kilograms or 100 centimeters, and only larger members of the Barbary, which are now considered more closely related to Nimravus than they were before. So both were kind of groups of false saber-tooths. Macarodonts are the groups that include Smilodon, things like that. These guys are groups of felid-like animals or feliforms that all evolved to have saber teeth like them, so it's convergent, but they're all not that closely related to each other. So there is some Barbary that grew larger, but these guys are considered the largest Nimravus, which is quite interesting. So they somewhat resemble actual felids with shortened snout and elongated back, but this is all convergent evolution, and they actually have feet that are more similar to civets, which is quite interesting. And they're also believed to be sensorial, or be able to use trees as both vantage spots, retreats, and points of ambush, so they could climb pretty well. Which is probably why their feet are more similar to basal feliforms, like civets and things like that, which is quite interesting. So they're probably able to climb a little better. But yeah, still really, really cool. Let's have a look at the little babies while we get to talk about them. Let's have a look. That's the female. No, that's the baby. Let's have a look at you. Oh, cutie. Yeah, let's look at you. Look at this little girl. She's cute. So these guys were one of the largest predators in Europe during its existence, and was pretty much a apex predator in its ecosystem. And you can see, very much like Sabertooth, it's got large canines that were large and scimitar-shaped, that were but they were less elongated and flattened than more derived members of groups such as the Mecharodons like Smilodon and Meganterion, and then things like Barbaphylidae, since things like actually Barbaphylis. And I think I actually covered a Barbaphyllid Samsosmilus, that was a Barbaphyllid as well, so a little bit different. This is a great example of convergent evolution. These independent groups of feliforms, or they're not all cats, so they're all cat-like or cat relatives. These guys all convergently evolved the saber teeth, which actually kind of worked quite well with their hunting style. And based on this, they were all hunting large ungulates. So this is a great example, as I mentioned, convergent evolution. They were all adapted these large canine teeth to help efficiently kill much larger animals, like things like large ungulates, like nodal ungulates, larger animals bigger than themselves. And you can see they've got that very like superficial bear-like shape to them, which is quite interesting. So let's have a look at. We can find the adult female. Where is she? There she is, sleeping right there, having a grand old time. So in terms of that taxonomy, they were considered assigned to the group Felidae. So Felidae includes pretty much all the modern cats. Things like Nimravus a bit too outside of that group. Then they were in the family Nimravidae. So Nimravidae and Barbaphylids are kind of in the group Feliformia. So Feliformia is quite a bit bigger, includes mongooses, things like that, and Barbaphylids. So Nimravidae was quite basal, but there's some, the Felordia, there's Barbaphylids actually more closely related to Nimravids. So basically Nimravids were just cats that look like civets that look like cats, so much more basal to the group, which is quite interesting. So great example of convergent evolution. And they seem to, some evidence to suggest they actually more closely related to like European clades of Nimravids. And there's some great similarities to another genus called Deinonychurus, but that's quite interesting. So yeah, really, really cool. Nice to see some extinct animals getting some love, and really cool to be able to talk about evolution, because it's quite interesting how everything changes and is related to each other. Taxonomy is quite interesting. So that was done by Great Cakes Mod as well. So the Aoudad and this guy was done by Great Cakes Mod. And we've got another Great Cakes Mod today. We're going to Australia for some marsupials. How can you not love some marsupials? We've got here the Eastern Barred Bandicoot, which is quite interesting. So these guys are a nocturnal rabbit-sized mammal, only found in southeastern Australia, being native to Tasmania and mainland Victoria, and one of the 3 surviving bandicoot species in the genus Palamus. And they're distinguished from the partly other species, a long-nosed bandicoot, by the 3 or 4 horizontal bars that you can see going down their back. So these guys, the mainland population is struggling, but they're doing okay in Tasmania, as I'll explain. So the Eastern Barred Bandicoot weighs less than 2 kilograms, or 4.4 pounds, has a short tail and 3 to 4 whitish bars across its rump. The Eastern Barred Bandicoot has 2 separate populations, one in the mainland of Australia and one in Tasmania. The Tasmanian form is a little bit larger, with the average adult mass being about 750 grams in Victoria and about 1,000 grams, or about a kilo, in Tasmania. They live for just 2 to 3 years and are not gregarious, so they can run by themselves. Males will occupy larger home ranges compared to females, though, and only consort with females for mating. In terms of their species or habitats, they're nocturnal, so they typically emerge at dusk to forage for a variety of small invertebrates like crickets, beetles, and earthworms. During the day, they rest in a grassland nest, and when foraging, they use their long noses, you can see there, to kind of probe around for all sorts of small little things there, which is quite cool. And they use this nose to probe in the soil. Females have 8 nipples, and it can produce up to a maximum of 5 young in a litter, with an average about 2 to 3 per litter. Gestation is actually just at only 12 days, which is among the shortest of any mammal. Then young are weaned at 55 days and remain dependent on their mother until they reach day 86. So no more than a couple months, 2 or 3 months, they are ready to go out into the world. And given ideal conditions, females can have up to 5 litters per year, although reproduction does become depressed in summer and ceases altogether in times of drought. So these guys they were once much more common. They were once distributed across the basalt plains of southern Victoria and in Tasmania, but due to predation of introduced foxes and cats, along with land clearing for farming, the Victorian subspecies or Victorian population is considered critically endangered. And since then, there have been 8 reintroduction sites that have been established to reintroduce into the former range. And the conservation of Eastern Barred Bandicoots Victoria is now dependent upon captive breeding and reinstruction programs. And keys of this include having captive populations as insurance populations and researching to improve breeding and things like that. So it's a great example of how zoos and captivity are helping endangered species. That's another great example. And there'd be management plans to protect the animals were translocated from the last three remaining population, mainland population, Hamilton and Melbourne. And then they're brought to captive breeding facilities in 1988 and found in a reserve as well. And sadly, there are four populations that are now four sites are now extinct, and functionally extinct in some areas. And the last remaining wild population, which was once found in the Guysburn and Hamilton, has been declared extinct. And the estimated population in Victoria in 2008 was about 150 individuals, but they are doing much better in Tasmania at least. They are still considered vulnerable, though, in Tasmanian. They are more widespread than their mainland cousin, as there's large areas of suitable habitats. And the main predator of these guys, the red fox, which was introduced, is not there in Tasmania. It was never introduced. So in Tasmania, they're doing a little bit better. But luckily, there are all sorts of recovery efforts to help these guys. As I mentioned, there's breeding programs, Zoos Victoria is helping them, University of Melbourne. And the best way they're trying to help these guys is breed them in captivity and then release them into predator-free areas that are fenced off so cats and foxes can't get in. And also reduces the infectious diseases as well. So this allows them to, breed in the area that's safe and free from introduced predators to allow them to survive. So in terms of their phylogeny, they are related to a couple other species of bandicoots like the western barred bandicoot and the long-nosed bandicoot. And they're closely related to the desert bandicoot of the large genus, but that went extinct, so we don't want the same. They also are closely related to bilbies, and they are all marsupials, so they are in the same group as koalas and the kangaroos, and they diverged from placental mammals about 100 million years ago, and seem to be doing quite well in Australia, well, until people came around. But they're still doing okay. But yeah, really, really cool. Love an eastern barred bandicoot. So all done by Great Cakes Mod, these three really, really great. And now we've got one by Monsoon, OG modder. We do love Monsoon. So next up, we're going to have a look at the tiger quoll. So they're a really cool animal. So they're also called the spotted tail quoll, or the spotted quoll, or the tiger cat. So these guys are a carnivorous marsupial in the genus Dancurus, native to Australia. So in terms of their taxonomy, they're in the family Dasyuridae, which includes most carnivorous marsupials, and they're originally in the genus Didelphus, which includes opossums, but they're now split. And there's two subspecies recognized. There is the nominant, which is found from southern Queensland down into Tasmania, and then there's another one that is found, an isolated population in the northeastern part of which is Gracilis in Queensland. So these guys, out of all the quoll species, they are the largest. So males and females of the main subspecies, the nominant subspecies, is about 3.5 to 8, on average 3.5 and 1.8 kilograms. So males are quite a bit bigger than females. Gracilis is average a little bit smaller, about 1.6 to 1.5, with the next largest species being the western quoll, which averages about 1.31 for males and 0.89 kilograms for females. So the next largest species is not nearly near as big as this guy. So these guys have relatively short legs, but they have a tail that's quite long, and it's actually longer than their head and body. It's about as long as their head and body combined. They have a thick head and a slightly rounded and elongated snout, and they also have 5 toes on each foot, both front and hind. The hindfoot has well-developed hallexes. And the long pink pads, as you can see under the feet, they're actually quite well adapted for them climbing, as you can see them climbing here. And this makes up for their tail not being prehensile, like a lot of monkeys and things like that. And the tiger quoll, as you can see as well, is kind of a reddish-black pelt, with a minority having black fur. There's also got white spots and colorations that do not change seasonally. And the only quoll species with spots on its tail in addition to its body. And the average length for these guys is about 900, with the dominant subspecies, about 930 millimeters for males and 811 females. Respectively, and then for Gracilis, which is the northern Queensland subspecies, is about 801 to 742 millimeters. And very interesting as well, these guys have the second most powerful bite force relative to body size of any living mammalian carnivore, with a bite force of 308 newtons, or about 31.4 kilograms, which is actually pretty impressive considering. And yeah, if you're curious to why this is on the Tasmanian Devil rig, actually I've learnt, well, Monsoon said this, that the Tasmanian Devil has unused climbing rigs, so that's what the Quoll is based on, and I think that's really, really cool. So in terms of their range and ecology, they're typically found around eastern Australia, where more than 600 millimetres or 24 inches of rain falls per year. Historically, they were present throughout southeastern Queensland, through to New South Wales, Victoria, southeastern South Australia and Tasmania. But Europeans, of course, who we kind of impacted and fragmented their range. They're now considered quite rare in southeastern Queensland, mainly restricted to parks. Other places they've declined by nearly 50%. In some places they're still quite rare. Although they were probably never very numerous in South Australia, they have been considered locally extinct for 130 years. But there was a quoll actually captured in the state's southeast in 2023, so that might not quite be true. So they do live in a variety of habitats, though. In Tasmania, they do quite well. They live in seasonal. They were once native to finders in King Island, but were extirpated in the 20th century. But they can live in quite a variety of habitats. They prefer wet forests, such as rainforests, and they are arboreal, but only moderately, and 11% of their travelling is done above ground. So in terms of prey items, these guys feed on insects, crayfish, lizards, snakes, poultry, small mammals, things like platypus, rabbits, possums, cursors, pademelons, all sorts of like wombats and wallabies. So they do feed on pretty much anything smaller or about the same size as themselves. They actually may scavenge also larger prey from kangaroos, feral pigs, cattle, and dingoes. However, they do not scavenge quite as much as Tasmanian devils. And much of their prey is eaten arboreal, so they climb high trees into trees to make nocturnal hunts for possums and birds. And the flexibility of their diets, especially their prey base, is not affected by bushfires. And when hunting, they typically stalk their prey, stopping only when its head is up. And then it launches its attack, a killing bite at the base of the skull or top of the neck, depending on the prey. They will pin down small prey and then devour it with the bite. Deliver the bite. With large prey, they jump and latch on their back and bite the neck. And quolls, in turn, they do have a few predators. They actually may be preyed upon by musk owls in Tasmania and dingoes and dogs in mainland Australia. Also, wedge-tailed eagles, large pythons will attack these guys. And they compete with a lot of introduced predators such as foxes, cats, and feral dogs, which is a little bit sad. But in terms of their life history, so they are generally, we'll have a look at the babies, they are generally nocturnal. So typically only found roaming around at night. And they rest during the day. However, juveniles and females, the young can be seen during the day, and they may leave their nests when lights out. Quolls' dens actually take the form of burrows, caves, rock crevices, hollow logs, tree hollows, and under houses and sheds. They actually move by walking and bounding gaits. Trails are not particularly important to quolls, but they do forage and set marks among runways or roads. They actually have a home range that can be quite huge, that can range from 580 to 875 hectares for males, and between 90 to 188 for females. And most resident quolls are female, although one population study found both males and females were split between transients and residents. Males typically will have overlapping home ranges that will overlap a few females that he can breed with. With the home range of females overlap less. Quolls will sometimes share dens during the breeding season, and after copulation, the female will act aggressively quite towards males, which is a little bit sad. For tiger quolls, olfactory and auditory signals are used more often than visual signals, so they often use smell and sound rather than sight to kind of figure things out. And for these guys will greet each other with nose-to-nose sniffs, and males will sniff the backsides of the females to check for estrus. And quolls actually do not mark their territories with mouth or air secretions, and some populations do have communal latrines, while others do not, which is quite interesting. And areas like rocky creek beds, cliff places, and rocks and roads will serve as locations for latrines. They're generally not very vocal, but vocalizations can be heard. They have like huffs and coughs and hisses, which is quite interesting. Juveniles will vocalize frequently when fighting with their mother, things like that. Other than that, they don't make too many sounds. In terms of their reproduction, they reproduce seasonally. So they mate in mid-winter, it's about June to July, but females can breed as early as April. The mating behavior for the tiger quoll is quite unique among other quoll species, as the female will vocalize when in estrus and easily accepts the male's mounting. And in addition to that, the female's neck swells up. Mating also involves the male holding onto the female's sides with their paws and holding in the neck with their mouth. Copulation can last quite long, for about 24 hours, and then females will give birth when their hindquarters are raised and their tails curled. And for that time, the young is in the pouch, the female will rest on her sides. After the young have left the pouch, females will stay in the nest they have built. For the first 50 to 60 days of their life, though, they cannot see, so they rely on vocalizations and touch to find their mother and siblings. They typically will stops when their eyes open about 70 days, and young are not carried on their back, but they do rest on their mother and cling to her when frightened. And by 100 days old, they become more independent of their mothers, and mothers more aggressively towards their young. And typically in the wild, they do not live more than 3 years. So most species of marsupials are not very long-lived. But let's have a look. We'll talk about their conservation status now. So they are considered near threatened. Look at this wonderful little guy here. So that, in terms of conservation, they are considered near threatened by the ICN. As of 2023, they have been listed under the EBC Act, with the Tasmanian population being regarded as vulnerable, while the Queensland population is considered endangered. So the species is vulnerable to decline because of certain changes in because it requires certain habitats and climates. They tend to live in low densities as well and compete with introduced animals like foxes and feral cats, and require much space, do not live very long. The biggest threat to their quolls, though, are habitat destruction, and hunters may directly contribute through prosecution, motor collisions, and 1080 poisoning. So conservationists are typically using 1080. This is a thing that's more in New Zealand, but also used in Australia too. They use population monitoring and public education to preserve the species and their habitat and minimize the impacts of 1080 bait is anything as well. And there are some areas with, obviously, habitats truly protected. But 1080 poisoning is something that's very controversial in New Zealand. Maybe not because for the right reasons. But it's something that is very useful against animals that don't have high toxicity levels to it. Typically, marsupials are a little bit more resistant than a lot of other placental mammals to it, because they grew up in areas where, or they evolved in areas where 1080 was naturally in the plants. So it's just like distilled and used as a good bait. But yeah, really, really cool. Really awesome to see these guys. Another awesome animal. So yeah, I think this is a great place to end the video. Great job, Monsoon. Great job, Ginger Toast and Ricky Ice, and great cake smell, and Tosco, I believe is his name. But yeah, really, really awesome. Really great assortment of mods. So yeah, I really, really, really hope you guys have enjoyed this video. I hope you guys like and subscribe. Always remember to get the little bell icon to get notified with anything. So yeah, if you guys enjoyed this video, hope you guys like and subscribe, and bye-bye.